Welcome to SC-300 Practice Exam 1, Core Administration. You will work through 45 original Identity and Access Administration questions using the Identity Access dossier. Read each scenario and every requirement. After the answer choices, you will hear, "Lock in your answer." Then you get exactly 3 seconds of silence. Pause if you need more time. The review gives the complete correct answer, a concise mechanism-focused explanation, and an exam clue. Question 1 of 45. Select one answer. Fabricam is creating a new Microsoft Entra workforce tenant. The tenant's initial sign-in namespace must be fabricam-labs.onmicrosoft.com. Which tenant creation value should the administrator enter as fabricam-labs? Option A, country or region selection. Option B, organization name for display. Option C, generated tenant ID. Option D, initial domain name. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D, initial domain name. Microsoft's tenant creation workflow asks separately for organization name, initial domain name, and country/region. The initial domain name supplies the prefix for the initial onmicrosoft.com namespace. Exam clue. When a scenario asks what controls the initial onmicrosoft.com namespace, separate the initial domain name from the organization's display label and generated tenant ID. Question 2 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso needs to add a consultant to its Microsoft Entra workforce tenant. The consultant must continue authenticating with an account managed by the consultant's home organization and must receive guest-level privileges in Contoso. Which user type should the administrator add? Option A, internal member. Option B, external member. Option C, external guest. Option D, internal guest. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C, external guest. An external guest authenticates through an external identity and receives guest-level access in the workforce tenant, satisfying both requirements. Exam clue. Classify a workforce tenant user on 2 axes: where authentication occurs and whether the account receives member or guest access. Question 3 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso already uses Conditional Access and Microsoft Intune. Its Windows, iOS, Android, and macOS devices are registered in Microsoft Entra ID and enrolled in Intune. A new policy must grant access to Exchange Online only when Intune reports that the device satisfies the organization's compliance policy. Which conditional access grant control should Contoso configure? Option A, filter for devices. Option B, require device to be marked as compliant. Option C, require app protection policy. Option D, require Microsoft Entra hybrid joined device. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B, require device to be marked as compliant. Intune reports device compliance to Microsoft Entra ID. Conditional Access consumes that signal through the require device to be marked as compliant grant control. Exam clue. Match the required evidence to the control. Intune device compliance state maps to require device to be marked as compliant, while hybrid join, device filters, and app protection evaluate different properties. Question 4 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso uses Microsoft Entra Connect Sync. It is installing a second Connect Sync server as a warm standby. The second server must continue normal imports and synchronization to maintain a current copy of the identity data, but it must suppress scheduled exports until an administrator promotes it after the primary server fails. How should Contoso configure the second server? Option A, enable staging mode. Option B, run it as a second active Connect Sync server. Option C, disable the synchronization scheduler. Option D, replace it with a Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync agent. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, enable staging mode. A ConnectSync server in staging mode continues imports and synchronization, so it has current identity data, but it does not run normal scheduled exports. An administrator can disable staging mode to promote it after a failure. Exam clue. For ConnectSync high availability, look for the combination of current synchronization state, suppressed exports, and manual promotion. That is staging mode. Question 5 of 45. Match each requirement to one configuration. Each configuration is used once. Contoso uses Microsoft Entra, privileged identity management for Microsoft Entra roles. Match each requirement to the PIM assignment type or role setting that directly satisfies it. Requirements. Requirement 1. A security operator must receive the role immediately without self-activation for a response assignment that ends after 48 hours. Requirement 2. An eligible role elevation must remain pending until the on-call security manager authorizes the request. Requirement 3. An administrator should have no role privileges until the administrator activates the role when needed. Requirement 4. Privileges obtained through one activation must automatically end within 120 minutes. Target bank. Choice A. Activation maximum duration. Choice B. Active time-bound assignment. Choice C. Require approval to activate. Choice D. Eligible assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to B. Active time-bound assignment. Requirement 2 maps to C. Require approval to activate. Requirement 3 maps to D. Eligible assignment. Requirement 4 maps to A. Activation maximum duration. PIM separates assignment state from activation policy. Eligible versus active determines whether activation is required. Time-bound controls assignment expiration. Approval and activation maximum duration govern eligible role activation. Exam clue. First decide whether the requirement concerns assignment state, assignment lifetime, or the activation event. Then select the PIM control from that layer. Question 6 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is deploying new Windows 11 devices that will be joined directly to Microsoft Entra ID. A new employee has no registered MFA method and must join a device and register Windows Hello for Business without using a password. The identity team must provide a time-limited Bootstrap credential. Which mechanism should the team use? Option A. A Windows Hello for Business PIN reset. Option B. A Conditional Access authentication strength. Option C. A Require password change at next sign-in setting. Option D. A Temporary access pass. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. A Temporary access pass. Microsoft documents Temporary Access Pass as a time-limited passcode for onboarding passwordless methods. During Microsoft Entra Join setup, a user can authenticate with tap without a password to join the device and register Windows Hello for Business. Exam clue. When a new passwordless user needs an initial administrator-issued credential for Microsoft Entra device join and Windows Hello registration, look for Temporary Access Pass rather than a recovery feature or an authorization policy. Question 7 of 45. Select one answer. Fabricam hosts a procurement application in its Microsoft Entra Workforce tenant. The partner users have unredeemed B2B guest objects assigned to the application, and the partner's email domain isn't verified in any Microsoft Entra tenant. The partner uses a third-party SAML 2.0 identity provider and requires its users to authenticate with their existing partner-managed accounts when they redeem access. Which additional configuration should Fabricam make? Option A. Send guest invitations that use email one-time passcode authentication. Option B. Add federation with the partner's SAML/WS Fed identity provider. Option C. Configure SAML-based single sign-on on Fabricam's procurement enterprise application. Option D. Configure cross-tenant synchronization from Fabricam to the partner. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Add federation with the partner's SAML/WS Fed identity provider. Microsoft Entra External ID supports direct federation with an external SAML or WS Fed IDP. The external users continue to authenticate with their IDP-managed accounts and are returned to Microsoft Entra after successful sign-in. Exam clue. Identify the home credential authority and the resource tenant. A third-party SAML or WS Fed provider authenticating users into a Microsoft Entra resource tenant calls for inbound SAML/WS Fed identity provider federation in the resource tenant. Question 8 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Contoso is creating a recurring single-stage access review for membership in the Sales Archive group. Only users inactive for 90 days should be reviewed. A selected compliance analyst will make the decisions. Denied access must be removed automatically when each review ends, and access must remain unchanged for users the analyst does not review. Order the configuration actions in the Microsoft Entra Access Review wizard. Items in the displayed order. Item A. Name the access review, verify the configuration, and create it. Item B. Select the compliance analyst as reviewer and configure the recurring schedule. Item C. Configure completion behavior, including automatic application of results and the action for users not reviewed. Item D. Select the group resource and scope the review to users inactive for 90 days. Lock in your answer. The correct order is Step 1. Select the group resource and scope the review to users inactive for 90 days. Step 2. Select the compliance analyst as reviewer and configure the recurring schedule. Step 3. Configure completion behavior, including automatic application of results and the action for users not reviewed. Step 4. Name the access review, verify the configuration, and create it. Microsoft's documented single-stage wizard proceeds through scope, reviews, settings, and review plus create. The explicit next transitions make the order unique. Resource and user scope must be established before reviewers and recurrence. Completion behavior is configured after those review settings. Creation occurs only after final verification. Exam clue. For an ordered portal workflow, follow the documented page transitions rather than grouping settings conceptually. Scope, reviews, settings, review plus create. Question 9 of 45. Select one answer. Fabricam uses the role assignable group SecOps Elevated, which is not in a restricted management administrative unit. Eligible users and approvers have Microsoft Entra IDP2 licenses. The member settings permit permanent active assignments, and change control prohibits direct membership changes outside PIM. Responders must become members only after an approved activation. Either of 2 designated approvers can approve. Activation must end within 2 hours. A cloud-only emergency account must remain a member without activation. Which configuration meets the requirements? Option A. Responders. Eligible members. Approval by either designated approver. 2-hour activation maximum. Emergency account. Permanent active member. Option B. Responders and emergency account. Eligible members. Approval by either designated approver. 2-hour activation maximum. Option C. Responders. Eligible owners. Approval by either designated approver. 2-hour activation maximum. Emergency account. permanent active owner. Option D, responders, active members with 2-hour time-bound assignments. Designated approvers listed. Emergency account, permanent active member. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A, responders. Eligible members, approval by either designated approver, 2-hour activation maximum. Emergency account, permanent active member. Eligible member assignments withhold responder membership until activation and support approval, plus a 2-hour activation maximum. A permanent active member assignment keeps the emergency account independent of activation. The premise closes licensing, RMAU, direct membership override, role setting, approval redundancy, and permanent assignment boundaries. Exam clue. Separate assignment state from activation policy. Eligible controls whether activation is needed, active bypasses activation, and approval and maximum duration govern the eligible activation event. Question 10 of 45. Select one answer. Fabricam and Contoso have separate Microsoft Entra tenants in the same commercial cloud. Fabricam is the home tenant for its consultants, and Contoso is the resource tenant. Contoso must automatically create, update, and remove the consultant's B2B user accounts according to assignments managed in Fabricam. Both tenants have the required licenses and administrator roles. Which configuration should the administrators use? Option A. Create and scope a cross-tenant synchronization configuration in Contoso and allow inbound user synchronization from Contoso in Fabricam. Option B. Create and scope a cross-tenant synchronization configuration in Fabricam and allow inbound user synchronization from Contoso in Fabricam. Option C. Create and scope a cross-tenant synchronization configuration in Fabricam and allow inbound user synchronization from Fabricam in Contoso. Option D. Configure Cross-Tenant Access Trust and have Contoso send and revoke B2B invitations whenever Fabricam changes a consultant assignment. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create and scope a cross-tenant synchronization configuration in Fabricam and allow inbound user synchronization from Fabricam in Contoso. Cross-tenant synchronization automatically provisions and deprovisions B2B users in the target tenant and keeps attributes synchronized. The configuration and assignment scope are created in the Fabricam source tenant, while the Contoso target tenant allows inbound user synchronization from Fabricam. Exam clue. Identify the authoritative source and receiving target. Create the synchronization configuration where identities originate, and permit inbound synchronization where B2B objects are provisioned. Question 11 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP2 and uses separate risk-based conditional access policies. All users in scope are cloud-only users registered for multi-factor authentication. A risky sign-in is not associated with a token theft-related or verified threat actor IP detection. One policy must let users self-remediate medium or high sign-in risk. A second policy must let users self-remediate high user risk. Which pair of grant requirements should Contoso configure? Option A. Sign-in risk. Require multi-factor authentication. User risk. Require risk remediation. Option B. Sign-in risk. Block access. User risk. Require risk remediation. Option C. Sign-in risk. Require multi-factor authentication. User risk. Block access. Option D. Sign-in risk. Require risk remediation. User risk. Require multi-factor authentication. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Sign-in risk. Require multi-factor authentication. User risk. Require risk remediation. Microsoft recommends require multi-factor authentication for medium or high sign-in risk, so a registered user can prove identity and remediate the risky sign-in. For high user risk, Microsoft recommends require risk remediation. It enforces reauthorization and, for password users, secure password change after successful MFA. The premise excludes detections that Microsoft documents as not automatically remediated despite an MFA claim. Exam clue. Match the control to the risk surface. MFA proves the current sign-in. Require risk remediation addresses account-level user risk and applies the current remediation workflow. Question 12 of 45. Select two answers. An Azure VM has two user-assigned managed identities attached, UAMI orders and UAMI logging. It has no system-assigned identity. An Azure identities-based .NET application on the VM must authenticate specifically as UAMI orders and read secret values from Vault Prod without stored credentials. Vault Prod uses Azure RBAC. Neither identity currently has a role on the Vault, and the application has not yet configured a token credential. Which two actions are required? Option A. Assign Key Vault Secrets user to UAMI orders at the Vault Prod scope. Option B. Configure Managed Identity Credential with the client ID of UAMI orders. Option C. Assign Key Vault Contributor to UAMI orders at the Vault Prod scope. Option D. Configure Managed Identity Credential with the client ID of UAMI logging. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Configure Managed Identity Credential with the client ID of UAMI-orders, and A. Assign Key Vault Secrets user to UAMI-orders at the Vault Prod scope. When more than one user-assigned identity is available, the application must identify the intended principal. Microsoft documents configuring Managed Identity Credential with a user-assigned identity client ID. Separately, Key Vault Secrets user grants data plane permission to read secret values. Selecting UAMI-logging authenticates the wrong principal, while Key Vault Contributor grants control plane management without secret value access. Exam clue. For Managed Identity Access, solve identity selection and target authorization separately. Explicitly select the intended attached user-assigned identity. Then grant a data plane role that permits the required operation. Question 13 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso is creating a Project Orion access package in an existing catalog. The catalog already contains the assigned membership security group Orion contributors. Only members of sales employees should be able to request the package, and every member has the correct manager attribute populated. An approved request must make the requester a member of Orion contributors, and the requester's manager must approve it. Which two configurations are required? Option A. Create a policy with none, administrator direct assignments only, as who can get access. Option B. Create a policy for the sales employees group, require approval, and select manager as the first approver. Option C. Add the owner role of Orion contributors as a resource role in the access package. Option D. Add the member role of Orion contributors as a resource role in the access package. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are D. Add the member role of Orion contributors as a resource role in the access package, and B. Create a policy for the sales employees group, require approval, and select manager as the first approver. The member resource role defines the entitlement delivered after assignment. The policy independently limits self-service requesters to sales employees and enforces manager approval. Both are necessary. The policy does not define the delivered group role, and the resource role does not define who may request or approve it. Exam clue. Separate an access package into the entitlement layer and the policy layer. Resource roles answer what access is delivered. Policies answer who can obtain it and under which approval and lifecycle rules. Question 14 of 45. Select one answer. An identity administrator is investigating Jordan's tenant-level and administrative unit-scoped Microsoft Entra directory role permissions. Jordan has no single application-scoped role assignments. The administrator must see Jordan's assigned roles at those scopes and determine whether each assignment is direct or inherited through a group. Which Microsoft Entra Admin Center view should the administrator use? Option A. Check access in an Azure Subscriptions Access Control IAM page. Option B. Jordan's Sign-in Logs page. Option C. Jordan's Assigned Roles page. Option D. Jordan's Groups page. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Jordan's Assigned Roles page. Microsoft documents that a user's Assigned Roles page shows roles assigned at different scopes, and whether each assignment was made directly or through a group, providing the assignment evidence requested. Exam clue. Evaluate directory role permissions from role assignment, origin, and scope evidence. Do not substitute group membership, sign-in activity, or Azure Resource IAM for the Microsoft Entra role assignment plane. Question 15 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has one Microsoft Entra tenant and support teams in 4 regions. Each regional team must receive the Help Desk Administrator role for only the users in its own region. The teams must not receive tenant-wide user management permissions. What should Contoso create for each region? Option A. A custom security attribute on the region's users, with the support team granted permission to read the attribute. Option B. An administrative unit containing the region's users, with the Help Desk Administrator role assigned at that administrative unit scope. Option C. A Microsoft 365 group containing the region's users, with the team-made group owners. Option D. An Azure resource group for the region, with the Help Desk Administrator role assigned at the resource group scope. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. An administrative unit containing the region's users, with the Help Desk Administrator role assigned at that administrative unit's scope. Administrative units are designed to restrict supported Microsoft Entra role permissions to a defined portion of an organization. Populating one with a region's users and assigning Help Desk Administrator at that scope provides regional rather than tenant-wide administration. Exam clue. When a single tenant needs delegated directory administration by geography or division, look for administrative unit scope. Groups organize collaboration, and Azure Resource Groups scope Azure resources, not Entra user administration. Question 16 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso synchronizes its users from on-premises ADDS to Microsoft Entra ID. Users have supported Microsoft Entra joined Windows 11 devices, and the patched domain controllers are reachable and adequately deployed in each authentication site. Contoso wants users who sign in with Windows Hello for Business to access on-premises SMB resources by using Cloud Kerberos Trust without deploying user certificates. Which configuration should the identity administrator implement? Option A. Issue Windows Hello for Business authentication certificates from Active Directory Certificate Services, then enable Certificate Trust for on-premises authentication instead of Cloud Trust. Option B. Federate each custom domain with ADFS, then enable Windows Hello for Business without configuring a Microsoft Entra Kerberos server object. Option C. Enable password hash synchronization and seamless SSO for each ADDS domain. Then leave the Cloud Trust policy unconfigured. Option D. Create a Microsoft Entra Kerberos server object in each applicable ADDS domain. Then enable Windows Hello for Business and Cloud Trust for on-premises authentication. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Create a Microsoft Entra Kerberos server object in each applicable ADDS domain, then enable Windows Hello for Business and Cloud Trust for on-premises authentication. In the Windows Hello for Business Cloud Kerberos Trust model, Microsoft documents deploying a Microsoft Entra Kerberos server object in every applicable ADDS domain and enabling both Windows Hello for Business and Use Cloud Trust for on-premises authentication. Microsoft Entra ID issues a partial on-premises TGT, which the client exchanges with a reachable ADDS domain controller for a full TGT. The stem explicitly closes the synchronized user, supported device, domain controller patching, line of sight, and site capacity prerequisites. Exam clue: separate the cloud sign-in path from the on-premises ticket path. Verify which trust component issues or exchanges Kerberos material, which device policy selects the trust model, and whether certificates are permitted. Question 17 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has a West administrative unit that contains the West employees group. A licensed regional administrator already has the user administrator role scoped to the West administrative unit. The administrator can manage the group, but cannot reset passwords for the non-administrative users who belong to it. Which additional configuration gives the administrator the required access while preserving administrative unit scope? Option A. Add the individual West employees users directly as members of the West administrative unit. Option B. Make the regional administrator an owner of the West employees group. Option C. Remove and re-add only the West employees group object as a member of the West administrative unit. Option D. Replace the scoped assignment with user administrator at tenant scope. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Add the individual West employees users directly as members of the West administrative unit. Administrative unit membership is not transitive through a group. Adding West employees scopes management of the group object, but each user must be added directly to the West administrative unit before the scoped user administrator can manage that user's properties or password. This is an actual administrative unit membership configuration, not merely a recommendation to use administrative units. Exam clue: identify the directory object that the scoped administrator must manage. Then determine whether membership in the chosen scope is direct or inherited through a container. Question 18 of 45. Select one answer. Fabricam added fabricam.com to its Microsoft Entra tenant, but the domain is still unverified. The domain is managed, is not verified in another tenant, and must become the default suffix offered when administrators create new users. Existing user principal names must remain unchanged. An administrator has the domain name administrator role and access to the DNS registrar. Which plan should the administrator use? Option A. Publish a generic CNAME record at the registrar and make fabricam.com primary while its status is unverified. Option B. Federate fabricam.com with ADFS. Verify the federation configuration instead of publishing the supplied ownership record, and then make the federated domain primary. Option C. Publish the Microsoft-provided TXT or MX record at the registrar. Verify fabricam.com in Microsoft Entra ID, and then make fabricam.com primary. Option D. Delete the tenant's initial onmicrosoft.com domain and replace it with fabricam.com as the new initial domain. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Publish the Microsoft-provided TXT or MX record at the registrar. Verify fabricam.com in Microsoft Entra ID, and then make fabricam.com primary. Microsoft Entra first provides a domain-specific TXT or MX record that must be published at the DNS registrar to prove ownership. After the domain verifies, a domain name administrator can make the non-federated custom domain primary. The primary domain becomes the default for newly created users in the portal, but changing it does not rename existing users, and the initial onmicrosoft.com domain remains in the tenant. Exam clue: Model domain administration as state transitions, and evaluate which operations change ownership state, creation defaults, or existing object identifiers independently. Question 19 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has users with the required Global Secure Access licenses with physical, 64-bit Windows 11 devices that are Microsoft Entra joined to its tenant. The tenant has not yet been onboarded to Global Secure Access. Contoso must route Exchange Online and Teams traffic from these roaming devices through Global Secure Access without publishing private applications or relying on branch locations. The client must run continuously, and non-privileged users must not be able to disable it. Which deployment plan meets the requirements? Option A. Onboard the tenant, enable the private access profile, deploy private access connectors and quick access, install the Windows client through Intune, and hide the client disable private access action. Option B. Deploy the Windows client through Intune and hide its disable action, but leave the tenant not onboarded and all traffic forwarding profiles disabled. Treat a successful client installation as proof of forwarding. Option C. Onboard the tenant, enable and assign the Microsoft traffic forwarding profile, configure remote network connectivity at each office, omit the endpoint client, and require roaming users to connect through an office VPN. Option D. Onboard the tenant, enable and assign the Microsoft traffic forwarding profile, deploy the Windows client through Intune, verify its Microsoft 365 channel is connected, and hide the client disable action. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Onboard the tenant, enable and assign the Microsoft traffic forwarding profile, deploy the Windows client through Intune, verify its Microsoft 365 channel is connected, and hide the client disable action. The Windows client is the endpoint traffic acquisition component for roaming devices, but it forwards only traffic selected by assigned portal profiles. Exchange Online and Teams are in the Microsoft traffic forwarding profile. The tenant must be onboarded. The supported Microsoft Entra joined Windows 11 devices can receive the client through Intune, and a connected Microsoft 365 channel verifies runtime state. Because the standard client interface can let a user disable the client until it is re-enabled or the machine restarts, hiding the disable action prevents non-privileged users from defeating the continuous forwarding requirement. Exam clue. Solve global secure access deployments in 4 layers: supported endpoint and tenant binding, traffic acquisition method, destination-specific forwarding profile, and live client state. Connectors publish private resources. Remote networks acquire branch traffic. The client acquires endpoint traffic. Question 20 of 45. Arrange all actions from first to last. Contoso has the required Microsoft Entra ID P2 licenses and uses PIM for a Microsoft Entra role. Priya has an eligible assignment. The role requires multi-factor authentication, a reason, and approval by a delegated approver, who is not Priya. Priya needs the role for a limited administrative task. Order the actions that move the role from eligibility through an approved activation request. Items in the displayed order. Item A. The delegated approver selects the entry in Approve Requests, provides a business justification, and selects Submit. Item B. Priya completes required verification, enters the required reason, and reviews or adjusts the available scope, start time, and duration settings. Item C. Priya selects Activate in the completed activation pane. Item D. Priya opens My Roles, locates the eligible Microsoft Entra role, and opens its activation pane. Lock in your answer. The correct order is Step 1. Priya opens My Roles, locates the eligible Microsoft Entra role, and opens its activation pane. Step 2. Priya completes required verification, enters the required reason, and reviews or adjusts the available scope, start time, and duration settings. Step 3. Priya selects Activate in the completed activation pane. Step 4. The delegated approver selects the entry in Approve Requests, provides a business justification, and selects Submit. The requester opens the Eligible Role Activation pane, satisfies required verification and reason controls while reviewing any available request settings, and selects Activate. When approval is required, that action creates a pending request. The delegated approver can then locate and decide it. The order follows request object state, rather than treating optional scope or schedule customization as mandatory. Exam clue. For PIM ordering, track the request object state rather than memorizing menu labels. Eligible role selected. Activation controls satisfied. Request created. Separate approver decision. Question 21 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso's users are already registered for both Microsoft Authenticator push notifications and SMS. A conditional access policy already requires MFA for the intended sign-ins. System-preferred authentication is disabled. Contoso wants every user to be prompted first for the strongest registered method during the MFA step, while leaving first-factor behavior unchanged. Which tenant-wide setting should an authentication policy administrator configure? Option A. Start a Microsoft Authenticator registration campaign for all users. Option B. Set system-preferred authentication to enabled and include all users. Option C. Enable legacy per-user MFA for every user in the tenant. Option D. Replace the existing conditional access policy with an authentication strength requirement. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Set system-preferred authentication to enabled and include all users. System-preferred authentication selects the most secure method that each user has already registered. Microsoft documents that the enabled state applies this preference to second-factor authentication only, so it meets the MFA prompt requirement while preserving first-factor behavior. It is configured under Microsoft Entra ID, Authentication Methods, Settings, and can include all users. Conditional access remains responsible for determining when MFA is required. Exam clue. Separate 3 layers. Which methods are available and registered, which policy requires a challenge, and which control ranks eligible methods when the challenge occurs. Question 22 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is moving a pilot group from SMS to Microsoft Authenticator push notifications. Pilot users can complete MFA and do not already have Authenticator push configured. Authenticator is enabled for the pilot group in the Authentication Methods policy, with authentication mode set to any. Members of an emergency support group must not receive campaign prompts. Users may postpone setup, but after 3 skips, registration must be required. Skipped users should be interrupted again after 5 days. Which registration campaign configuration meets the requirements? Option A. Set the campaign state to Microsoft Managed, select Microsoft Authenticator, configure a 5-day interval and 3-skip limit, target the pilot group, and exclude the emergency support group. Option B. Enable an Authenticator campaign for the pilot group, exclude the emergency support group, set the snooze interval to 5 days, and disable limited number of snoozes to preserve the Skip for Now option. Option C. Set the campaign state to enabled, target Microsoft Authenticator at the pilot group, exclude the emergency support group, set days allowed to snooze to 5, and enable limited number of snoozes. Option D. Change Authenticator to passwordless mode, enable an Authenticator campaign for the pilot group, exclude the emergency support group, and configure 5-day snoozes with the limited snooze setting enabled. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Set the campaign state to enabled, target Microsoft Authenticator at the pilot group, exclude the emergency support group, set days allowed to snooze to 5, and enable limited number of snoozes. The explicit enabled state exposes the target method, user targeting, exclusions, snooze duration, and limited snooze controls. Because Authenticator is separately enabled in any mode, and these users have not registered push, they are eligible for the nudge after completing MFA. A 5-day interval controls when a skipped user is interrupted again, while limited number of snoozes enabled allows 3 skips and then requires registration. Excluding the emergency support group removes only the campaign prompt. It does not disable Authenticator for that group. Exam clue. Treat a registration campaign as a nudge layered over method eligibility. First enable the method for the population, then configure one campaign target, include exclude scope, interrupt interval, and finite or unlimited snooze state. Question 23 of 45. Match each duty to one role. Each role is used exactly once. Contoso separates enterprise application duties across its full tenant application fleet. Each user needs the least privileged built-in Microsoft Entra role for only the described task. Match each duty to the appropriate role. Requirements. Requirement 1. Approve delegated OAuth permissions requested by enterprise applications. The duty excludes application permissions and Microsoft Graph app-only permissions. Requirement 2. Inspect completed access review decisions for enterprise applications without changing reviews, assignments, or application configuration. Requirement 3. Publish internal web applications and maintain connector groups for remote access through the tenant's proxy service. Target bank. Choice A, Application Administrator. Choice B, Security Reader. Choice C, Cloud Application Administrator. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C, Cloud Application Administrator. Requirement 2 maps to B, Security Reader. Requirement 3 maps to A, Application Administrator. The role table separates the 3 task boundaries. Delegated permission consent maps to Cloud Application Administrator. Application proxy maps to Application Administrator because proxy management is the key difference between the 2 app administrator roles. And read-only app access review inspection maps to Security Reader. The duties span the tenant's app fleet, so ownership of one enterprise application would not cover the required scope. Exam clue. For enterprise app delegation, identify both the operation and its scope. A single app owner can be narrower for one object, but tenant-wide consent, proxy administration, and read-only review evidence belong to different built-in role boundaries. Question 24 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP1 licenses for group-based application assignment and develops a web application that signs in employees. The application code expects either reader or approver in the role's claim, and must authorize users through security group assignments. Which configuration should Contoso use? Option A. Expose reader and approver as delegated OAuth permission scopes on the app registration. Then grant each security group consent to its corresponding scope on the enterprise application. Option B. Create custom Microsoft Entra directory roles named Reader and Approver. Scope the roles to the app registration, and assign the security groups as application administrators. Option C. Configure the app registration to emit group membership claims. Keep Reader and Approver only as group display names, and omit app role definitions and enterprise app role assignments. Option D. Create enabled Reader and Approver app roles on the app registration with users groups allowed. Set the expected role values, and assign security groups to those roles on the enterprise application. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Create enabled Reader and Approver app roles on the app registration with users groups allowed, set the expected role values, and assign security groups to those roles on the enterprise application. App roles are application-specific authorization definitions created on the app registration. Setting users' groups as an allowed member type makes the roles assignable to employees and security groups, and the role value is what application code receives in the roles claim. After the definitions exist, an administrator assigns groups to the roles through the enterprise application's users and groups surface. Delegated scopes govern access on behalf of a user and are not a substitute for this roles claim design. Exam clue. Separate an application authorization design into the plane that defines stable business permissions and token values, and the plane that grants those permissions to principals. Do not substitute OAuth consent or directory administration. Question 25 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has an enabled conditional access policy that requires a compliant device for workforce users who access the payroll app. It plans a second policy that requires MFA when those users access payroll from untrusted locations. 2. Monitored emergency access accounts must remain available for recovery, and a daemon accesses payroll with a service principal. Contoso must validate impact before enforcing the new requirement. Which rollout plan should Contoso use? Option A. Exclude the emergency accounts. Keep the workforce MFA policy in report-only mode while reviewing pilot sign-ins and what-if results. Plan for cumulative MFA and device compliance, and assess the service principal with workload identity controls separately. Option B. Run the new policy in report-only mode, then disable the existing compliant device policy before activation. Include the emergency accounts to keep coverage uniform, and add the daemon's application object to the workforce user assignment. Option C. Exclude every privileged directory role. Enable the policy only for the pilot group. Evaluate only the new policy's MFA result, and leave the service principal unreviewed, because conditional access can never apply to workload identities. Option D. Include the emergency accounts. Enable the new policy immediately. Treat the MFA policy as replacing the device policy because it was created later, and rely on the user assignment to enforce MFA for the service principal. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Exclude the emergency accounts. Keep the workforce MFA policy in report-only mode while reviewing pilot sign-ins and what-if results. Plan for cumulative MFA and device compliance, and assess the service principal with workload identity controls separately. Microsoft recommends excluding emergency access accounts from conditional access policies to prevent lockout. Report-only mode records how the new policy would evaluate real sign-ins without enforcing its grant controls, enabling review through sign-in evidence and what-if before staged activation. Once enabled, the new MFA policy does not replace the existing device policy. A sign-in in scope for both must satisfy both requirements. The daemon service principal is not governed by a user-scoped policy and must be assessed separately under conditional access for workload identities or another workload control. Exam clue. Plan conditional access by closing 4 boundaries: recovery exclusions, report-only evidence before enforcement, cumulative results from every applicable policy, and separate user versus workload identity targeting. Question 26 of 45. Select 2 answers. Contoso wants Defender for Cloud Apps to continuously discover unsanctioned cloud applications from a supported Palo Alto firewall. A supported on-premises Windows host is available for the log collector, and the firewall emits a parsable supported traffic log format. Administrators must review discovered applications by catalog risk and measured usage. No cloud discovery data source or log collector is configured. Which 2 configuration actions are required to establish the continuous discovery feed? Option A. Create the Palo Alto data source without linking it to a collector, and configure the collector host to poll Defender for Cloud Apps for firewall events. Option B. Configure the firewall to send its supported traffic logs to the collector receiver and verify that the collector is running. Option C. Create a Palo Alto Cloud Discovery data source, create a log collector, and link the data source to that collector. Option D. Export a one-time log snapshot from the firewall and upload it as a snapshot Cloud Discovery report. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C. Create a Palo Alto Cloud Discovery data source, create a log collector, and link the data source to that collector. And B. Configure the firewall to send its supported traffic logs to the collector receiver and verify that the collector is running. Continuous cloud discovery depends on an end-to-end log path. Defender for Cloud Apps needs a data source whose appliance and format match the firewall. That data source must be linked to a deployed and running log collector, and the firewall must forward its logs to the collector's receiver. Once those logs are uploaded and parsed, the discovered app's experience can combine catalog risk factors with observed users, transactions, and traffic for prioritization. OAuth and session policies govern different evidence and enforcement points. Exam clue. Trace the evidence pipeline in layers. Identify where telemetry originates, how it reaches the discovery service, and which ladder controls analyze or enforce against different evidence types. Question 27 of 45. Select one answer. A Contoso member lost the phone that held the member's only usable Microsoft Authenticator registration. Temporary Access Pass and Microsoft Authenticator are already enabled for the member in the Authentication Methods policy. The help desk schedules a supervised recovery session for 1400, and the replacement Authenticator registration can be completed immediately. Which action should an authentication administrator take? Option A. Create a one-time tap whose activation starts at 1500 and have the member begin the supervised recovery session at 1400. Option B. Create a one-time tap valid at 1400 and have the member register replacement authenticator during the supervised session and remove the lost method. Option C. Create a one-time tap that expires at 1350 and have the member use the code for the scheduled 1400 replacement registration. Option D. Create a one-time tap valid at 1400. Use it only for a portal sign-in, and postpone replacement authenticator registration until the following day. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Create a one-time tap valid at 1400 and have the member register replacement authenticator during the supervised session and remove the lost method. Microsoft documents tap as a time-limited credential for recovery and registration of passwordless methods. Because policy scope is already satisfied, the missing object is a valid user-level tap created by an authentication administrator. The member can use it to sign in to security info, register Authenticator on the replacement phone, and remove the lost method. For a one-time tap, passwordless registration must finish within 10 minutes after tap sign-in. The scheduled immediate session closes that timing requirement. Exam clue. Separate tenant method availability, a user-specific recovery credential, and enrollment of the replacement authenticator. A policy setting alone is not a consumable credential. Question 28 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso has created a Microsoft Entra application proxy enterprise application for an on-premises IWA web app. The internal and external URLs are correct. Microsoft Entra pre-authentication is selected. The current user.read admin consent step is complete, and the enterprise app is already configured for integrated Windows authentication with the backend application's SPN and the appropriate delegated login identity. The application server and the planned connector server are domain joined in the same domain. No private network connector is installed, and no delegation is configured. Which two actions are required to provide remote access with seamless SSO? Option A. Install and register the connector, but place it in a connector group that the enterprise application does not use. Option B. Enable unconstrained delegation for the connector computer account to every service in the domain. Option C. Configure constrained delegation on the connector computer account only to the backend application SPN. Option D. Install and register a private network connector that can resolve and reach the backend, and assign the application to its connector group. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are C. Configure constrained delegation on the connector computer account only to the backend application SPN, and D. Install and register a private network connector that can resolve and reach the backend, and assign the application to its connector group. Application Proxy requires a registered private network connector that can reach the internal URL and initiate outbound communication to the cloud service. It is not deployed as an inbound DMZ listener. For an IWA backend, Microsoft Entra pre-authenticates the user, and the connector obtains the backend Kerberos token. In this same domain scenario, the connector computer account therefore needs constrained delegation specifically to the application's SPN. The stem already supplies the enterprise app URL, pre-authentication, IWA, SPN, delegated login identity, and current consent settings, leaving exactly these two actions. Exam clue. Treat remote publication and backend single sign-on as separate hops. Validate the private-to-cloud transport boundary independently from the protocol used to obtain a backend session. Question 29 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso must add 240 people from an external research consortium to its workforce tenant as B2B guest users. The consortium does not use Microsoft Entra ID. Each person has an individual email address. Every recipient must receive an invitation with the same customized message and be redirected to the Contoso My Apps page after redemption. This is a one-time onboarding event. Ongoing attribute updates and automatic deprovisioning are not required. Contoso's external collaboration settings permit invitations, and the identity administrator has the user administrator role. Which action should the administrator take? Option A. Download the current bulk invite CSV template. Add one row per recipient with the invitation fields. Upload it under bulk operations, bulk invite, validate it, and submit the job. Option B. Create a cross-tenant synchronization configuration that provisions the consortium identities into Contoso and enable inbound synchronization in Contoso. Option C. Use bulk create with a user's CSV to create 240 member accounts in Contoso and set each account to require a password change at first sign-in. Option D. Configure direct federation with a SAML identity provider for the consortium, and rely on the federation configuration to create the guest users and send their invitation emails. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Download the current bulk invite CSV template, add one row per recipient with the invitation fields, upload it under bulk operations, bulk invite, validate it, and submit the job. Microsoft Entra Bulk Invite is the portal operation designed to send multiple B2B collaboration invitations from one CSV job. The downloaded template accepts each invitee email, a redirection URL, and a customized invitation message. Upload validation precedes submission, and the completed job adds guest objects to the directory. The one-time requirement makes cross-tenant synchronization unnecessary, while the external identities rule out internal member account creation. Exam clue. Choose the collaboration mechanism from Cadence and Lifecycle. A finite onboarding list, Continuing source-driven lifecycle and partner-controlled authentication are different problems. Question 30 of 45. Select one answer. A cloud-only user is registered for MFA. In Microsoft Entra ID protection, risky users shows the user as high and at risk. Two associated records in risky sign-ins are also at risk. A high-risk sign-in from an anonymous IP address that the user denied, and a medium-risk sign-in from a compliant device that the user could not verify before becoming unavailable until the next shift. The investigation has not classified either record as safe or confirmed the account as compromised. The incident responder has activated both security operator and user administrator. Before handoff, operations requires the responder to update the user, the associated sign-ins, and the corresponding detections to remediated. The action must take effect before the user is reachable, and the user must create the permanent password at the next sign-in. Which action should the responder take? Option A. From risky users, dismiss all risk for the user and advise a password change at the next sign-in. Option B. When the user is reachable, require an MFA-backed secure password change and then verify the risk records. Option C. From risky sign-ins, dismiss the high-risk sign-in and leave the medium-risk sign-in for the next shift. Option D. From the risky user details, reset the password and securely provide the generated temporary password to the user. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. From the risky user details, reset the password and securely provide the generated temporary password to the user. Microsoft documents that resetting the password from identity protection requires both security operator and user administrator. The administrator-generated temporary password immediately changes risk for the user, sign-ins, and corresponding detections from at-risk to remediated. The user then must change the temporary password at the next sign-in. Dismissal instead records dismissed without changing the password. A user performed secure password change can also record remediated, but only after the user completes MFA and changes the password, which misses the handoff timing boundary. Exam clue. Match the required state and timing across all linked records. Administrator reset remediates now. Dismissal records dismissed, and user remediation waits for user action. Question 31 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso adds an internet-hosted single-tenant gallery SaaS application to Microsoft Entra ID. The vendor supports both SAML SSO and the Microsoft Entra SCIM provisioning connector. Contoso requires users to authenticate to the SaaS app with Microsoft Entra credentials. Accounts in the SaaS app must be created, updated, and deactivated automatically as users enter or leave scope. All in-scope users have Microsoft Entra ID P1 licenses and are direct members of a security group already assigned to the enterprise application. Nested groups are not used. A cloud application administrator has the vendor's SAML metadata and valid provisioning credentials. Which two actions should the administrator take? Option A. On the enterprise application, configure SAML-based single sign-on with the vendor identifier, reply URL, and signing certificate values. Option B. Install a private network connector and publish the SaaS URL through Microsoft Entra Application Proxy with pre-authentication enabled. Option C. Create an app registration, add an OAuth redirect URI, and expose a delegated API scope for the assigned group. Option D. On the enterprise application, configure automatic provisioning with the vendor credentials and mappings. Set the scope to assigned users and groups, and start provisioning. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A. On the enterprise application, configure SAML-based single sign-on with the vendor identifier, reply URL, and signing certificate values. And D. On the enterprise application, configure automatic provisioning with the vendor credentials and mappings, set the scope to assigned users and groups, and start provisioning. The two requirements terminate on separate enterprise application surfaces. SAM SSO makes Microsoft Entra the identity provider, so users authenticate with their tenant credentials. Automatic app provisioning connects to the vendor SCIM endpoint and uses credentials, mappings, and assignment-based scope to create and update in-scope accounts and disable or remove them when access is removed. The stated P1 licenses and direct group membership close assignment-based provisioning prerequisites. Exam clue. Decompose SaaS integration into session authentication and target account lifecycle. Satisfying one plane does not automatically configure the other. Question 32 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso wants non-administrators to consent on their own only when an application is from a verified publisher or is registered in Contoso, and requests delegated permissions that Contoso has already classified as low impact. When a user cannot consent, the user must be able to submit an approval request to designated reviewers instead of opening a support ticket. A global administrator will configure the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. The reviewers already hold Cloud Application Administrator, and every request in this scenario contains delegated permissions only, no Microsoft Graph application permissions or other app roles. Contoso will allow up to 1 hour for workflow activation before testing. Which two actions should the global administrator take? Option A. Set users can request admin consent to apps they are unable to consent to yes, and configure the authorized reviewers and request expiration. Option B. Set user consent for applications to allow user consent for apps, regardless of publisher, for every permission that does not require admin consent. Option C. Set user consent for applications to allow user consent for apps from verified publishers for selected permissions. Option D. Use the verified publisher selected permissions user consent setting, but leave admin consent requests disabled and direct blocked users to contact support. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are A. Set. Users can request admin consent to apps they are unable to consent to yes, and configure the authorized reviewers and request expiration. And C. Set. User consent for applications to allow user consent for apps from verified publishers for selected permissions. The built-in verified publisher/selected permission setting gives ordinary users only the bounded self-consent path requested. The app must be verified or tenant registered, and the delegated permission must be classified low impact. Enabling admin consent requests supplies the separate escalation path for requests that fall outside user consent policy. Because reviewer designation alone does not elevate privileges, the STEM explicitly gives reviewers Cloud Application Administrator and excludes Microsoft Graph application permissions. It also closes the Global Administrator and activation timing prerequisites. Exam clue. Treat consent as two gates. One determines what users can approve unaided, and the other routes blocked requests for privileged review without granting reviewers a role. Question 33 of 45. Select two answers. Contoso has Microsoft Entra ID P1. An identity administrator who is assigned Cloud Application Administrator must create a Finance tab in My Apps. Payroll Portal is assigned to all finance employees, while Expense Hub is assigned only to finance managers. The Finance tab must be available to the finance group, list both applications, and continue to show each user only applications that the user is already assigned. Which two actions should the administrator take? Option A. Remove the existing enterprise application assignments and rely on collection membership to grant both applications to finance users. Option B. Create an admin collection under Enterprise Apps App Launchers, and add Payroll Portal and Expense Hub on the Applications tab. Option C. Add the finance group only on the collection's Owners tab, so membership in the group makes the collection visible in My Apps. Option D. Add the finance group on the collection's Users and Groups tab, so the collection is presented to that audience. Lock in your answer. The correct answers are B. Create an admin collection under Enterprise Apps and App Launchers and add Payroll Portal and Expense Hub on the Applications tab. And D. Add the finance group on the collection's Users and Groups tab so the collection is presented to that audience. The Applications tab defines which related apps the collection can organize, and the Users and Groups tab defines who receives the collection. A My Apps collection remains a presentation filter over existing application entitlements. All finance employees can see Payroll Portal, but only finance managers can see Expense Hub because only they already have that app assignment. Cloud Application Administrator and Entra IDP1 satisfy the documented role and licensing prerequisites. Exam clue: separate presentation from authorization. Collections affect presentation only. Underlying resource assignments still determine effective access. Question 34 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP1. A Conditional Access Administrator has a finalized Terms of Use PDF for the Records app. Workforce users must accept the terms at first access and again after 30 days measured from each user's previous acceptance. One acceptance per user is sufficient across devices. A non-interactive service account that accesses records must not be targeted. Contoso accepts that an expired consent prompts re-acceptance only after the user's session expires. Which configuration meets the requirements? Option A. Set a 30-day duration, enable per-device consent, and apply the custom conditional access policy to records and workforce users while excluding the service account. Option B. Use a monthly calendar expiration, leave per-device consent off, and apply the custom conditional access policy to records and workforce users while excluding the service account. Option C. Set duration before reacceptance, required to 30 days. Leave per-device consent off and use a custom conditional access policy for records and the workforce users that excludes the service account. Option D. Set a 30-day duration and leave per-device consent off, but publish the terms without a conditional access policy for records. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Set duration before reacceptance required to 30 days. Leave per-device consent off and use a custom conditional access policy for records and the workforce users that excludes the service account. Duration before reacceptance required creates the requested rolling schedule from each user's own acceptance, rather than a shared calendar boundary. Keeping per-device consent off preserves one acceptance per user. A custom conditional access policy supplies the workforce user and records app scope, and the service account must be excluded because terms of use grant controls do not support service account enforcement. When the 30-day consent expires, the user is prompted at the next applicable session after the existing session expires. Exam clue. For terms of use, separate expiration model, user versus device acceptance, conditional access scope, and whether the targeted identity can interactively accept terms. Question 35 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso licenses its external user entitlement management scenario with Microsoft Entra IDP2. An identity governance administrator manages B2B guests who were first invited through approved access package requests. Tomorrow, each guest will lose the last access package assignment. Some guests also have direct Teams memberships outside access packages. Contoso must block each governed guest from signing in as soon as the last assignment is lost, and remove the guest object 14 days later. even when a direct Teams membership remains. Which configuration should the administrator use before the assignments expire? Option A. In the external user lifecycle settings, enable remove external user with a 14-day delay, but leave block external user from signing in disabled. Option B. In entitlement management control configurations, enable block external user from signing in, enable remove external user, and set the removal delay to 14 days. Option C. Rely on access package expiration to delete the guest, and exclude any guest with a direct Teams membership from entitlement management lifecycle processing. Option D. Create a recurring access review for the guests, and configure denied review decisions to block sign-in immediately and delete the guest objects after 14 days. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. In entitlement management control configurations, enable block external user from signing in, enable remove external user, and set the removal delay to 14 days. The lifecycle of external users controls act when an entitlement managed guest loses the last access package assignment. Enabling block external user from signing in satisfies the immediate sign-in boundary. Enabling remove external user and setting 14 days supplies the retention and deletion timing. Because these guests were invited through entitlement management, direct resource assignments, such as Teams membership, do not stop blocking or removal. Saving the setting before tomorrow's assignment loss also avoids the rule that changes do not reschedule guests already queued under an earlier value. Exam clue. External user cleanup depends on how the guest became governed, which lifecycle event occurred, and whether access blocking and object deletion have distinct timing requirements. Question 36 of 45. Match each requirement to one role. Each role is used once. Contoso uses Microsoft Entra entitlement management and has the required Microsoft Entra ID governance licensing. The administration portal restriction is off. For any catalog resource a delegate must add, that delegate already owns the resource. Match each requirement to the least privileged entitlement management role. Requirements. Requirement 1. For one existing catalog, maintain its resource inventory and delegate catalog-scoped roles. Requirement 2. Create and edit access packages and their request policies from resources already in one catalog, without editing the catalog itself. Requirement 3. Create new catalogs across the tenant and initially control each catalog that is created. Requirement 4. For an existing access package whose direct assignment path does not require approval, view requests and directly add or remove assignments without creating or editing the package. Target bank. Choice A. Catalog creator. Choice B. Access package assignment manager. Choice C. Access package manager. Choice D. Catalog owner. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to D, Catalog owner. Requirement 2 maps to C, Access package manager. Requirement 3 maps to A, Catalog creator. Requirement 4 maps to B, Access package assignment manager. Entitlement management delegation follows the object hierarchy. Catalog creator authorizes creation of own catalogs across entitlement management. Catalog owner governs one catalog. Access package manager authors packages and policies within one catalog. Access package assignment manager operates existing assignments and requests only. Resource ownership remains a separate prerequisite for adding a resource, and the explicit no approval direct assignment premise avoids the documented approval bypass exception. Exam clue. Identify the governed object and the permitted verb. Tenant-wide creation, ownership of one container, package authoring within it, and assignment operations occupy different delegation scopes. Question 37 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is the resource tenant for B2B collaboration with Fabricam, another Microsoft Entra organization. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP1 and a security administrator has already allowed Fabricam users inbound access to the required Contoso application. A Contoso conditional access policy requires multi-factor authentication. Fabricam performs MFA in its home tenant, and Contoso must accept that MFA claim only for Fabricam. No device claim must be trusted. What should the administrator configure? Option A. In Contoso, set Fabricam-specific inbound trust to accept compliant device claims while leaving MFA trust disabled. Option B. In Contoso, set Fabricam-specific outbound access to trust MFA claims for Contoso users entering Fabricam. Option C. In Fabricam, configure cross-tenant synchronization to provision its users into Contoso before they access the application. Option D. In Contoso, set Fabricam-specific inbound trust to accept MFA claims from Fabricam's Microsoft Entra tenant. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. In Contoso, set Fabricam-specific inbound trust to accept MFA claims from Fabricam's Microsoft Entra tenant. Contoso is the resource tenant, so the decisive direction is inbound. Its organization-specific inbound trust settings for Fabricam can enable trust multi-factor authentication from Microsoft Entra tenants. Contoso still applies its own conditional access MFA requirement, but accepts a valid MFA claim from the Fabricam home tenant. If the claim is absent, an MFA challenge occurs in the home tenant. Microsoft Entra, IDP1, and Security Administrator are stated, and only the MFA claim, not device claims, is trusted. Exam clue. Determine which tenant owns the resource, which tenant authenticated the user, and which claim is being accepted before choosing the direction and scope of a partner trust rule. Question 38 of 45. Select one answer. A cloud-only, non-admin Contoso member leaves the company. A user administrator must prevent the account from starting new sign-ins and invalidate the member's Microsoft Entra refresh tokens and browser session cookies. The requirement does not claim that every already issued access token or application-issued cookie ends instantly. Which action should the administrator take in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center? Option A. Clear account enabled for the user and take no session revocation action. Option B. Clear account enabled for the user, save the change, and then select Revoke Sessions on the user's overview page. Option C. Select Revoke Sessions and leave account enabled. Option D. Disable every device registered to the user and leave both the user account and sessions unchanged. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Clear account enabled for the user. Save the change, and then select Revoke Sessions on the user's overview page. Microsoft's Cloud User Response sequence separates two state changes. Clear account enabled to block new sign-ins, then use Revoke Sessions to invalidate refresh tokens and browser session cookies. The target is a non-admin user, so user administrator satisfies the documented role boundary. Revocation can take a few minutes. Ordinary access tokens or application-controlled cookies can outlive the action, and the stem expressly avoids promising otherwise. Exam clue. Treat the identity's ability to authenticate and the lifetime of already issued renewable session material as separate response layers. Meeting only one leaves a different exposure. Question 39 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP1 and an Azure subscription. A log analytics workspace already retains data for 180 days. An administrator has Security Administrator in Microsoft Entra ID and Log Analytics Contributor on the workspace. Report consumers have Reports Reader and Workspace Read access. Beginning now, Contoso must analyze 120 days of sign-in failures and legacy authentication usage in a Microsoft Entra workbook. No Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting exists, and older portal-only events are not required. What should the administrator configure first? Option A, create a Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting that archives the sign-in log category only to an Azure storage account. Option B, open Identity Secure Score and wait for its recommendations to create the sign-in failure workbook dataset. Option C, create a Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting that selects the sign-in log category and sends it to the existing Log Analytics workspace. Option D, create a Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting that streams the sign-in log category only to an event hub. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Create a Microsoft Entra diagnostic setting that selects the sign-in log category and sends it to the existing Log Analytics workspace. Microsoft Entra workbooks require Premium P1, an accessible Log Analytics workspace, and appropriate Entra Azure roles, all supplied in the stem. The missing dependency is telemetry routing. Create an Entra diagnostic setting, choose the sign-in log category, and select Send to Log Analytics workspace. The 180-day workspace retention covers the future 120-day analysis window. Storage and Event Hub are different destinations, and Secure Score is a posture surface rather than a sign-in event source. Exam clue. Trace telemetry through 3 layers: event category, export destination, and the query or visualization surface that consumes the retained data. Question 40 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso is starting a self-service password reset pilot for the non-administrator employees in the SSPR pilot group. The pilot users have Microsoft Entra IDP1 licenses and have already registered methods allowed by the Authentication Methods policy. Other non-administrator users must remain outside the SSPR rollout. An identity administrator has been assigned the Authentication Policy Administrator role for the deployment. In the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, which action should the administrator take to enable SSPR for the required scope? Option A, under Entra ID, Password Reset, Properties, set Self-Service Password Reset Enabled to Selected. Choose SSPR Pilot and save. Option B, create a conditional access policy for SSPR Pilot that requires multi-factor authentication strength for the password reset user action. Option C, under Entra ID Authentication Methods, enable the registered methods for SSPR Pilot and leave Password Reset Properties unchanged. Option D, under Entra ID Password Reset Properties, set Self-Service Password Reset Enabled to All and save. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is A. Under Entra ID, Password Reset, Properties, set Self-Service Password Reset Enabled to Selected. Choose SSPR Pilot and save. Microsoft documents group-scoped SSPR deployment by setting Self-Service Password Reset Enabled to Selected on Entra ID, Password Reset, Properties, choosing the Microsoft Entra group and saving. The stem closes the P1 license, least privileged role, non-administrator population, group scope, and method registration prerequisites. Authentication method configuration and conditional access are adjacent controls but do not enable SSPR for the selected group. Exam clue. Separate who is eligible to use a recovery service from which authentication proofs eligible users can present. These are configured on different policy surfaces. Question 41 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso wants password changes and SSPR resets for its cloud-only employees to reject the organization-specific base terms Fabricam, Blue Yonder, and Redmond HQ, including common case and character substitution variants. All in-scope users have Microsoft Entra IDP1 licenses, and SSPR is already enabled for testing. An identity administrator has the Authentication Policy Administrator role. No on-premises ADDS accounts are in scope, and the test window begins several hours after configuration. Which action should the administrator take? Option A. Add the 3 terms to Smart Lockout and lower the lockout threshold so password changes containing those terms are rejected. Option B. Edit the global banned password list, append every required spelling and substitution variant, and publish the revised global list. Option C. Under Authentication Methods, Password Protection, set Enforce Custom List to Yes. Add the 3 base terms, 1 per line, and save. Option D. Deploy the Microsoft Entra Password Protection Proxy and DC agents. Then configure the terms only on the domain controllers. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is C. Under Authentication Methods, Password Protection, set Enforce Custom List to Yes. Add the 3 base terms, 1 per line, and save. The custom banned password list adds focused, organization-specific terms to Microsoft Entra Password Protection and works with the automatic global list. Enabling the list and entering each base term is sufficient because evaluation is case-insensitive and accounts for common character substitutions. The stem closes P1 licensing, Authentication Policy Administrator, SSPR testing, cloud-only object scope, valid term lengths, and the documented several-hour application window. Exam clue. Separate centrally maintained weak password intelligence from tenant-specific vocabulary, and configure organizational base terms, rather than attempting to enumerate every human variation. Question 42 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso reviews a visible identity secure score improvement action for which the tenant has the required license. A non-Microsoft vendor product already implements the recommended control for every user and object in the action scope. Contoso has validated and retained evidence of the vendor control, but Microsoft Entra cannot directly observe its completeness. The identity administrator has the SharePoint administrator role required to update the action status and will review the score after the next 24-hour evaluation cycle. Contoso wants the score to reflect the implemented control. Which status should the administrator select for this improvement action? Option A. Planned. Option B. Resolve through third party. Option C. Resolve through alternate mitigation. Option D. Risk accepted. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is B. Resolved through third party. Identity Secure Score allows an administrator to mark an improvement action resolved through third party when a non-Microsoft application or product already addresses the recommendation. That state awards the action's points so the score can represent the existing security posture, while Microsoft explicitly does not verify implementation completeness. The stem therefore closes license visibility, full object scope, delegated update role, evidence ownership, platform object, and the 24-hour score calculation cadence. Exam clue. Classify posture work by whether implementation is future, intentionally declined, or already complete, and then by whether the completed control is supplied internally or externally. Question 43 of 45. Match each requirement to one operation. Each operation is used once. Contoso has Microsoft Entra IDP1 and 3 existing enterprise applications. A cloud application administrator must manage assignments in enterprise apps for then users and groups. Analyst app exposes an analyst app role. Operations app exposes an operator app role. Legacy portal exposes no app roles. Group assignment applies only to direct group members, and all required administrator consent is already granted. Match each requirement to the correct operation. Requirements. Requirement 1. Ava alone needs the authorization level intended for data analysis duties in Analyst app. Requirement 2. Every direct member of operations team needs the authorization level intended for operations duties in Operations app. Requirement 3. BIN needs access to Legacy Portal, whose service principal publishes no application roles. Requirement 4. Contractors must lose their current relationship to Analyst app without deleting the group or service principal. Target bank. Choice A. Add the user assignment and select Default Access. Choice B. Add the group assignment and select the Operator app role. Choice C. Add the user assignment and select the Analyst app role. Choice D. Select the existing assignment and choose Remove. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C. Add the user assignment and select the Analyst app role. Requirement 2 maps to B. Add the group assignment and select the Operator app role. Requirement 3 maps to A. Add the user assignment and select Default Access. Requirement 4 maps to D. Select the existing assignment and choose Remove. The assignment surface separates principal selection, app role selection, default access for applications without roles, and removal of an existing assignment. Group-based assignment requires the supplied P1 license and applies to direct members rather than nested groups. Exam clue. Separate the principal, the application's exposed authorization choices, and the lifecycle operation. Assignment changes an access relationship. It does not define roles or delete directory objects. Question 44 of 45. Select one answer. Contoso has Microsoft Entra ID governance licensing. An existing catalog contains a security group role, an enterprise application role, and a SharePoint site role. Employees and users from the configured Fabricam connected organization need the same 3-resource bundle, but employees require manager approval and 180-day assignments, while Fabricam users require sponsor approval and 30-day assignments. Both populations must request access, and an access package manager must minimize duplicated entitlement configuration. What should the administrator plan? Option A. Create one access package and one request policy that combines employees and Fabricam users with a single approval and expiration configuration. Option B. Directly assign both populations to the 3 resources and use a recurring access review instead of access package request policies. Option C. Create separate employee and Fabricam access packages that each contain the same 3 resource roles. Option D. Create one access package containing the 3 resource roles with one request policy for employees and a separate request policy for Fabricam users. Lock in your answer. The correct answer is D. Create one access package containing the 3 resource roles with one request policy for employees and a separate request policy for Fabricam users. An access package is the reusable resource role bundle, while its policies govern who can request it, approval, and assignment duration. Because the bundle is identical, but internal and external governance differs, one package with separate employee and Fabricam policies meets the requirements without duplicating resources. Exam clue. Model the reusable entitlement separately from the rules that govern each requester population. Shared resources favor one bundle. Different eligibility, approval, or lifetime rules require separate policies. Question 45 of 45. Match each requirement to one property change. Each property change is used once. Contoso has 3 existing enterprise applications of supported types. A cloud application administrator will configure each application on its properties page. No affected user is a global administrator. Users of the 3rd app are already assigned. Know its direct URL, and the app must remain enabled. Match each requirement to the enterprise application property change. Requirements. Requirement 1. App B must remain usable, but token access must be limited to a curated set of principals. Requirement 2. App C must disappear from launch services, while bookmarked direct entry continues for its current users. Requirement 3. No interactive user flow or app-only token flow may succeed for App A. Target bank. Choice A. Set enabled for users to sign in to no. Choice B. Set visible to users to no. Choice C. Set assignment required to yes. Lock in your answer. The correct mapping is Requirement 1 maps to C. Set assignment required to yes. Requirement 2 maps to B. Set visible to users to no. Requirement 3 maps to A. Set enabled for users to sign in to no. The three properties affect different planes: overall sign-in and token enablement, assignment-gated authorization, and launcher visibility. The stem closes supported application types, the global administrator exception, existing assignments, and direct URL knowledge. Exam clue: separate enablement, authorization gating, and presentation. A setting that hides a tile is not a sign-in block, and a setting that requires assignment is not merely a visibility control. You completed all 45 questions. Group any misses by objective, identify the requirement you overlooked, and answer again from the mechanism rather than from a memorized keyword. Thanks for practicing with WebLizard CertLab. Review your week objectives, revisit the complete exam clues, and continue with the next SC-300 practice exam when you are ready.